Welcome, everyone, to the Ghost Helper podcast. I'm your host, Tina Erwin, and I have a very special guest with me today. I would like to introduce you to my friend Ron Mills. And way back in, I think, 2009, 2010, when I just started out as a writer, I was doing radio shows, and somehow Ron and I got connected. Ron has an amazing background as a social worker for 40 years. He's also been on his own fascinating spiritual path. And I'm going to have him explain some of that. But I'm really, really thrilled to have everyone welcome Ron Mills. Ron, thank you so much for being here today.
And thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about
we met. I had a show called The Chosen, and it was driven. Oh yeah, it was guest driven because all I knew is what I didn't know. So from being a child, I was interested in the paranormal, and I just really wanted to actually talk to people that wrote these books that I was interested in. I wanted to learn everything I could because I just knew in the 70s there was a show called Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill story, and it was
I'm
one of
very
those movie of the
familiar with the
weeks that
story.
they had. Yeah. And James Earl Jones played Barney Hill, so he played
Oh,
Barney,
wow.
the postman that was captured. Yeah, captured and examined with his wife.
Yeah.
And I begged my mom. I said, "Can I stay up and watch it? Can I stay up and watch it?" I saw the previews. Can I stay up and watch it? She said, "Fine. I know you'll be asleep by the time it comes on." You know, it came on at 9 and went off at 11. And I didn't sleep any. There with the covers like, oh my God. Real aliens took them, so, and I was fascinated by the whole thing. So,
well, their story and the star charts that they were able to identify, everything that they identified were eventually
Zeta
proved to
Reticuli.
be absolutely 100% accurate.
Zeta Reticuli, and it was a person in Ohio, a school teacher who was into astronomy, found it, Zeta Reticuli, because she Betty drew the map because they had Barney out. She was talking to the aliens, and it said, "Where are you from?" And they showed her star chart, and they said, "Where are you from on here?" And she said, I really don't know. And they said, why should we tell you if you don't know where you are? But they pointed out where you're from. And under hypnosis, she drew that map. And then some school teacher figured out, and she was an amateur into astronomy, and she figured out where it was and matched it. And it's Zeta Reticuli, and now we know that's where the grays come from.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I think there's a lot of information is seeping out and is being revealed right now. And it's a pretty I can't believe I'm living in the times when this is going to be revealed. There's been a lot of predictive programming. And then you have people who have had very, very interesting experiences that they can't explain. And you can't discredit. I mean, the Betty and Barney Hill story was so realistic and it's irrefutable. I mean, they had a very long and happy marriage. And this was a really dynamic couple from the point of view that they were the real thing.
And the thing about it is they weren't planning to tell anybody anything. They had lost time and they had nightmares. So they went to a psychiatrist who put them under hypnosis. And you can listen to them under hypnosis on the web. You can find it, the actual tapes. And they had no idea what happened to them. And he found out then. He leaked it. Which you're not supposed to do. It was fantastic. And he leaked that information. They had no plans of telling anybody. Barney was into the civil rights. His postal workers in the civil rights movement. They didn't want to sound like kooks. because she was white and he was black. They didn't want to sound like kooks. And he leaked it out. And you can listen to those tapes and, and how afraid they were when they saw it coming towards them, and they couldn't do anything about it. And
I
he
think
was
they
ex-military.
were
He was frightened.
paralyzed. And they
Yeah.
weren't paralyzed with fear. They were afraid, but they
Mhm.
were paralyzed by the aliens, is my understanding. Is that
When they first saw it, they first saw it, and he went out and saw and looked up and said, maybe it's some type of military plane. And they told him through his mind to stay right there. And he was like, they're coming for us, ran back to the car. And that's what, and he had a gun too, but he's like, they're coming for us. They came, to see whoever that was in the ship coming for them, and talking to him through his mind. But he was out then, and she was able to ask him questions walking around.
well, it makes you wonder. I mean, because part of the focus of our show today is past lives. What was it about him? Because it's almost like he was the preferred target. He was the preferred being they wanted to communicate with. She was along for the ride, but he was the one they were the most interested in. Does that ring true for you?
I think so. And from what I've seen and heard people say, they seem to be very interested in our reproduction because there's such
Yeah,
a
I've heard that a
proven
lot
thing.
too.
Yeah. And yes, they examine. I don't know exactly why they work, but it seems like every time I've had people talk about aliens, they seem to be interested in our reproduction.
Well, there are the reports of alien abductions have been going on. Reports of aliens and ships appear in ancient writings and in
Mm-hmm.
ancient Renaissance paintings.
Mm-hmm.
These are not new. And then there's in the Upanishads in India, there were the Vimanas, which were these incredible spacecraft with these spinning wheels, which you've seen theme and variation of these spinning wheels over and over and over, which in some respects they talk about how stargates work. And I think that we're right at this incredible doorway of all of these revelations and technology discussions. And we know that we know that Eisenhower was contacted in the 50s, and they showed him all this technology, and they
Mm-hmm.
didn't want it available for freedom of information requests or public records requests. So they gave the technology to private firms, whether it was Raytheon or
Yes.
RCA or Lockheed Martin or McDonald, all these different companies that, and I may have some of the companies wrong, but whoever was then, big companies during that time. And a lot of the technology, an astounding amount of the technology that we're using today was
Yes.
given to these corporations. And I mean, the glass on an iPhone is
Exactly.
basically, that glass is alien technology. And there's so much out there. Everybody's so worried about using fossil fuels. There's so much energy out there that pretty soon fossil fuels will just be an old memory, and we'll be
Mhm.
using things that have been around for a very long time. And I think that many of us lived during the time of the Egyptians, and we're familiar with the whole purpose of the pyramids, which was never a tomb. They've never found a single body in any of these pyramids.
An energy source.
They're absolutely an energy source. And I don't know who the genius was who looked at the Pyramid of the Sun and the Moon in Teotihuacan in Mexico. I've been there. I've been inside the Great Pyramid. But they looked down and they said, God, this just looks like an integrated circuit, doesn't it? when they looked at it from above and they superimposed an integrated circuit, they
Mm-hmm.
said, this was an energy grid. This this was built by somebody super sophisticated. And then they've mapped all of these pyramids all over the planet. You know, the one in Bosnia, the massive one in China. Oh my gosh. And Libya has more pyramids than Egypt. And they never show you the rest of the pyramids all over Egypt. And there are, in fact, pyramids all over the planet. Imagine if they all were
Mm-hmm.
communicating, and that's free energy for everybody. Maybe that's what Tesla was trying to tell us.
Yes, he was ahead of his time, definitely. And
Well,
when he died,
yeah.
his all this stuff was raided and taken out. So
Well, we know who took it.
by who? Yeah.
It was taken. It was taken by John Trump, President Trump's uncle, and he took all of Tesla's documents and a great number of his devices, and that technology wasn't lost. The information wasn't lost. It was because John Trump was some kind of a genius engineer or physicist. I'm not fully capable of describing who and what his skill set was, but he was well known. And since the agents who were going through Tesla's stuff had no idea what they were looking for, and they called him in, he knew exactly what he was looking at and made sure that it was not destroyed. So that's why I think we're going to be seeing more and more and more of this technology finally coming to the fore, even if it's 100 years later.
I just look at and I know for sure that they're back engineering alien technology from the time that I remember in the seventh grade. So happy the teacher's like, "Hey, we have a computer," and they were saying, "Oh, great, great." I say, "Computer," and I watched, Star Trek, and I watched which Star Trek and Lost in Space. It was great. I was like, "Computer." Computer. He said, no, no, you have to learn this language. This language is logos. And they were talking. I was like, that sucks. I said, and Star Trek, they talk to the computer and it talks back. And didn't know in my time frame, the watch talks to me now. My phone talks to me now. Like, I ask it questions. And
Predictive programming, getting us
yes,
ready.
it talks to me now. And that first one didn't talk at all. So it just everything talks to you. Talk to it. Talk to the TV and tell it to change the channels or come on or just
Yeah. So we're living in a time of enormous technology, but if we go back to, well, if we look at way past lives, let's go way back. Let's go back to Atlantis and Lemuria.
wow.
If we were to suppose that a great deal of the technology that some of us remember from that time, then we would become very cognizant that we get to live during this time and be involved with this technology in some way because maybe some people invented it way back when, or
Mm-hmm.
part of it. And one of the things that's coming out now, and you certainly see this with the new age, everybody's talking about, oh, crystals this and crystals that. And, Lord knows I have my certain sets of my Herkimer diamonds here. I've got an office full of them. We used to own a crystal mine in Arkansas, so we had a lot of rock. We still do have a lot of crystal. But the crystal connected, because the Great Pyramid was limestone, it could use the crystalline structure and the granite that was there to connect. And when they look at the stone properties, they all have quartz in them. The
And
piezoelectric.
wasn't most of the pyramids on
Can you
ley
say that again?
lines?
Say that again. I think I lost you for a moment here. Are you there, Ron?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I don't know what happened,
Yeah, I
but
can hear you
when
now.
you were talking about weren't most of the stones made of something?
Well, the pyramids were they on ley lines,
The pyramids
constructed on
were
ley
first,
lines, earth ley
yes.
lines. And
Well, there's an interesting book. I don't remember the man's name, and he discussed that all alien tracking and visits follow specific ley lines on the earth. So to do, follow up with what you just said, not only are the pyramids
Mhm,
perfectly on ley lines because they're an energy grid on the earth. The Curry line, the Hartman line, and Benker lines are the names of the ley lines. And I studied
mhm,
biogeometry with Dr. Ibrahim Karim for several years. And his discussion of how to determine where these ley lines were and how they operate in the ether was just mind blowing. I think it's something you would truly enjoy. He's an Egyptian architect. And when someone is an architect, they're shaping space. However, we work on our homes, we're shaping the space or manipulating the space. Well, the ancients manipulated not only the space, but the energies that were emanating from the space. And they
mhm.
needed crystal to do that. And the earth is made of a ton of, crystal. So it's really amazing what they can do. So I think what we're saying is, I think that some of us lived long time ago in Atlantis, and we had jobs to do. Some people remember working on the pyramids, and they were not using slaves, and rolling them on wood. They were using levitation,
Mhm.
you know, because I mean, you would have had to have practically half the planet to build these
Mm,
pyramids. And
exactly.
there's in nowhere. I've been from one end of Egypt to the other, inside the Great Pyramid, all the way from Cairo to Aswan, and there is not one single depiction of the construction of the pyramids anywhere on earth of any pyramid. And when you think of that, and there are no depictions inside the Great Pyramid in the Giza Plateau, there's no hieroglyphs. The other interesting thing is that is that all of Egyptian art, all of it, for all of time in Egypt, used the same art form, the way it appears on on a page. All of the
Mm.
hieroglyphs were the same. All of the way the people were depicted was the same for thousands of years. When you look at the art forms in various cultures all over the planet, it evolved, but the Egyptians stayed the same. I'm not sure what that significance is, but I'm a big time art lover. And you look at all the different forms as people evolve with their art, as people are creative, but not in Egypt. That was the way everything was depicted, and it was depicted that way for 1,000 years. So it's just nothing short of astounding. And if you didn't have a pyramid, you had an obelisk. And there's a reason there's an obelisk, which is, the Washington Monument, and then
Yes.
obelisk right outside the Vatican, wink, wink. So a lot of interesting things you can go back and forth with. But if we're talking about past lives, I mean, do we feel like maybe some of us were there? I mean, have you ever thought about maybe you were there? And it doesn't have to be in Egypt. It could be anywhere on earth.
I don't know exactly, but where I do believe in past lives, and uh, mainly in it, and you come back as people. I don't believe you come back as animals or anything like that, but I believe you
No.
come back as people. That's my thought. Uh,
Oh, I don't believe you. Based on my humble level of research, you come back as a mortal soul,
mm,
and you learn to relate to the energy fields of animals and plants, and the unusual levels of consciousness that you can detect in a stone. I mean, I have a lot of crystal, but I have these two enormous Herkimer diamond clusters,
Nice.
and they are they have a very, and I have a lot of them. I have them in a lot of different places. They emit a very, very clean energy. So if
Mhm.
I'm working with a client or doing a podcast, the stones that surround me, including salt lamps, help me to manage a clearer message. I like to think that. And I
Blue
think
lapis
that,
wool. Blue lapis wool on my arm.
oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When you're wearing the crystal, I think that, and especially on what you wear on your left hand, energy enters the body through the left side and exits through the right side. So if
Hmm.
you have an anomaly in your body and you look at, is it the right side or the left side, you can tell whether or not energy coming to you is blocked, or you're giving so much you're exhausted and it's leaving, or you have a problem on the right side. And that helps you to understand a little bit more about an illness or an anomaly that's happening to you. And sometimes illnesses can persist life after life. And
That's what I was going to ask you.
well, I have several examples. One of them is and I've talked about this story before, but it's so compelling. I had a client who, she wanted to help me understand her husband who was addicted to video games. And so she divorced him.
Hmm.
And in the process of working with me over the several months, we did repeated past life regressions. And as I'm doing these regressions with her, we must have done 4 or 5, and every single life she committed suicide. Life after life after life, she took her own life. And sometimes, and it was always because this particular soul, could be her son, her brother, her dad, her husband, didn't matter. When he died, she was gone literally in some lives within hours of that person's death.
Oh.
And it was so she said, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea." And I said, "I don't think you've met that man yet." And she said, "I don't think so. I don't, there's no one in my life like this." And so we stopped working for a while. And not very long after that, she was on a plane, met a Marine pilot, fell in love, got engaged, was planning the wedding, and his jet crashed in Yuma, Arizona. And he died, and the co pilot died. And she knew he was that guy from the past lives. I knew it too. I knew it as soon as I saw it on TV. I went, "Oh my gosh, that's the guy." I called her and I said, "Do we need to work? How are you doing?" And she said, "I can feel it. I can feel the urge to die and join him, but I'm working with it. I understand it. I can see it now." So if you have some depth of insight to an action you took in another life, in this life, you can consciously choose a different path. You can change your future for a long, long time. And a year later, I got a wedding invitation from her, which was a really big deal. So I called her and I said, I, I don't know any of your friends. And she said, "Yes, but you're the only person on earth who knows that spiritually I have lived past a dangerous death gate for myself. Please come." And I took my youngest son because my husband was at sea, and we went to her wedding, and she married another Marine pilot who's a really fine man, who's a really good guy. And then I talked to her a year after that. So she's lived 2 years after the death. And she said, "I miss the guy who died every day. And I'm working to fulfill my purpose, which is simply to live." And that's part of why I wrote a book, Soul Evolution, Past Lives and Karmic Ties, because you can have a mission and you can have a purpose. Sometimes your purpose is simply to live. And work on yourself. I thought the story was really compelling because she understood it.
Did you help her remember that she had past lives, or did she remember?
We did a regression.
Okay, during the regression, but did she think that she had past lives before the regression?
She wanted to understand. This was before we had any idea she'd ever committed suicide.
Oh,
We
okay.
would
So
do
she
these
didn't know.
regressions because she wanted to know, why was she with this crazy husband, who was completely focused on
Yeah.
video game. And so I said, well, we can do a regression. I have no idea what it's going to show you. So, that's what we did.
She had no idea.
We had no idea what was going to happen because
Right.
I am not the kind of psychic that says, oh, I think you had a past life as. That's a violation of spiritual law. You should never, ever tell somebody, even if you suspect they have a past life. And you can figure it out by going in their home and looking at their art. Now, if you came in my house, you'd say this woman had a life in Italy because there's Italian stuff everywhere. So um, I think it's interesting because I have on lots more examples of things that have happened to people over
The
time.
reason I'm asking is because I watched this program, and you still probably could find it on one of the streaming platforms called Ghost in My Child. But there was no ghost in the child. All these children remembered past lives, and they clearly remembered them. And they even proved that they were connected to these past lives, because I remember seeing one. He said he was interested in planes, and the kid was like about 5, and he said, I had a plane like that and they shot it down and I died.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, why does he keep saying that and stuff? And the he knew some of the guys he was with during World War II, and a couple of them was still alive, and he knew their names, and they found them.
That happened to a submariner. Same
Wow.
thing. He
Why
kept
why do
having,
kids retain memories and then they forget them later? Because they said once he found it and talked to them, and they said, yeah, I knew their names. Oh, there they are. And then he just kind of moved on and forgot when he got older. Why
it
does that
was
happen?
resolved because when you die, especially a tragic or a violent death, the soul grieves. Living people grieve that that person died, but the person who died is no longer in a mortal frame. The soul lives forever. That's what Christ meant by life everlasting. The soul looks at their body and they're grieving. I passed an accident scene where a guy hit a telephone pole, and I couldn't help it. He's talking to the cop and he's dead. He says, I just went out for ice cream and my brand new sports car, and I just missed that jog in the road. And the ice cream is
Mhm.
melting and the cop can't hear him. And he said, my wife, I'm going to miss my wife. And there is this deep grief, this longing. I crossed him over. There was a very famous story of a submariner who kept, well, he didn't know he was a submariner. He's a guy who kept having these recurring dreams of his submarine imploding or being hit by a depth charge or a mine. I forget how it was in World War II, because those old diesel boats, they were built pretty quickly. And finally, he did the same thing. He went to a psychiatrist and they did hypnotherapy, and he went back to that life and he named his crew members. He named the submarine, and
Mhm.
he told, he indicated that they were hit by something and they lost everyone. And he was so devastated that they died. He wanted somebody to know what happened to them. And then he remembered his family. He went back to Georgia where his family was, and they're very Christian, salt of the earth people, and they looked at him and they recognized his eyes and they burst into tears. And he said, I had a room up here and I stored my blah 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 here. And he had parents from this life, but he went to visit
Mhm.
his parents who were ancient from that past life. It was an astonishing story, and they never even questioned it. He was their long lost person who died. I mean, it helps you to understand how souls just keep going. In a way, even though he died, he got to have closure by telling his previous family he loved them and he missed them. And then he could be at peace. But now he's still alive. You get to come back. Death isn't an end, it's just the closing of one door and the opening of another.
Now, I've always thought, well, reincarnation. I do agree that there is, and I've said things, that the book I read, and then when I had a show, I had Barbara Lane on there, said you'll say clues to it, and I said I would joke around. I said in a past life I was a king, but I wasn't a very good king, and it was a coup, and I ended up in this life. And I had to learn. And I thought it was a learning process. As you said, you are possibly remembering, what do you do? I said, I'm a social worker. I have to. And she said, well, think about your life as a social worker. And I did. And I said, when I thought about it, I said, there was times I could move up. And I was, you're in military, you're ex-military. I had to always be a boots on the ground social worker. I had to be connected to people. And I said, I work with at-risk youth. I worked in pre-release centers, homeless shelters, 23 years in adult protective services, investigating allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Child services, 8 years part-time in Cuyahoga County. And during the crack epidemic, I get the police to kick in doors and stuff. And 3 kids hadn't seen their mom in 3 days, eating condiments. And I had to be, when it was time for me to move up, one time they said, yeah, it's a director spot. Do you want to be a director? And I was for a year, and I hated it because I hated meetings and stuff. I got to be out there. I got to be out there. This is keeping me away from people. No, you get to help people in a different way. We had to get funding and say, I got to be out there. And I was. From then on, I passed over, hey, there's another thing you want to try. No, I knew what I was. I said, no, it'll take me away from what I'm supposed to be doing. And,
well,
it's just, I had to.
Maybe karmically, this was your way to
being better because I was a miserable kid.
To really relate to people,
right,
who had so many problems.
Right.
And you had the power, because as a social worker, as a director, you would have had more power, but not direct. And that feeling of one-on-one, that direction with people, enabled you to use power in a just way, to right a wrong, to help with an injustice, just to make sure children were fed.
Definitely engaged. Definitely had to be engaged, direct contact with the clients. I had to be. And I had that job once, and I said, I hated it. I said, they're out there. I'm in here in meetings. I hated it. And I didn't say, and I thought about the way I grew up. I grew up poor, very poor, in a housing project in Cleveland. And I was like, the first job I got when I became a social worker is I did my field study, and they were telling me there's this place, it's called Althway Homes. It's a housing project and stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on there and stuff. But, first they said, oh, they need you. They said they will take you for your study at the welfare office, and you'll be able to administer, checks and stuff like that. And I said, I sit behind the desk. And it was like they said, they told me about the housing project. And they said there's a lot going on there, a lot of crime and stuff. And I was like, and then you'll have to do outreach 3 days a week in the school that's there, the high school. And I said, yeah, that's the high school I went to. And I lived in those projects. I'm ready to go. Perfect for me. Perfect for me. I know the area and everything, so
Wow.
it was perfect. So I was like, and I was there for 7 years, and other job opened up a Hell's Kitchen and stuff. And I was there, and it was always, I had to, and I had part-time jobs. I was people in recovery, and it was just one thing at the other. The last job before semi-retired was with homeless vets. So it always had to be on the ground there, so I could be in there. And I joke, I had to learn this time. I had to learn people's needs, what to help them. I had to learn this time. And it was so funny. I said, everything fell into place. Even the test was easy, the LSW licensed social work test. And I was so afraid of taking it. And, I tried to get the pre-test and stuff from one of my college professors. And she said, oh, whatchamacallit's not giving that out and stuff. And she told me, just take the test, yeah, you'll know what you're doing. And I didn't study at all for the test. And she told me, Dr. Jackson said, well, just relax, take a little drink, and it'll relax you to do the test. And that morning I came down to, it was in another city. I took more than a few drinks, and I was drunk on the test. And remember falling asleep on it. And I said, I failed this test miserably. The person that came down with me, they flunked it. And she said, you were drunk. I passed the test in the 90 percentile. I said, I don't even remember, but I did somehow. So,
well, maybe somebody helped you. Maybe this was so much of what you are meant to do.
Yes, that's what I think. I just remember it was 175 questions. 100, and I'm going through them and say, yep, this one, yep. I just, yep, almost kind of nodded off. Yep, this one. And so at one point I nodded off, and the guy next to me touched me and say, you need to wake up your sleep. And I say, hey, look at your own paper. That's the day you took them in papers. Now you just go in at the computer and do it. You have people looking at you and stuff. And literally, it was what I needed to do that.
Yeah.
And what's going to be something else when I went to college? Was going to be something else. And it didn't write that first year. And I said, there's a school of social work here. Okay, that sounds good to me. So.
Wow. That's amazing. Well,
because I wasn't going to be a priest. I wasn't going to be a priest.
Yeah.
I said, I can't take the vow of chastity. And Brother User told me one time, he said, he said, I'm in the order, Society of Precious Blood. He said, and he was African-American, said, you should do that, told me he was 15, and he was going over his stuff and about chastity. And I said, what's that? And then he explained it to me. And I said, I'm still a virgin, but I'm going to say no to that part.
But that's
I'm
a really
say no to
part
that.
It's a really, it's a really important part of living.
Yeah. So I'm going to say no to that part. And social work, school of social work, I said, that's what I'm meant to do.
Well, look at it. I'm thinking how many people you would have affected. And people look at, there's an ocean of people beyond this person. But if you're helping this person, you don't know how that's going to be paid forward. You never know what that's going to look like.
And, I never told you this when you show, I had the record at Adult Protective Services for finding dead bodies.
Oh my gosh.
for
How
finding
did that
dead
come
bodies of
about?
seniors. Yeah, finding seniors dead in their house, and it was just literally they joke with me in the office. They said, "Ron's really Dexter of his office, a serial killer. He's trying to lower his caseload." So, but they have the record for finding dead bodies. Uh, Somebody told me, "Does that bother you?" And I said, for a minute I did, but I thought about it and I said, if I'm here and nobody knows it, my body is here, and there's nobody knows it and can find me, yeah, I think somebody wants, I think they want to be found. So I'm okay with it, you know.
Well, I mean, somebody has to find that person. I mean, and
Right.
they deserve it. They deserve a, recognition and a burial.
Yes, yes. That's what I was thinking, like, oh, yeah. Yeah, somebody I would want to be found. So it doesn't really bother me. But
Right.
yeah, I had that, I just
Well,
felt, yeah.
getting back to what somebody was in another life and what they can be in this life. I I had a sailor who beat his wife, and the Navy sent him to anger management school, and the psychiatrist, and he did group therapy, and nothing worked. So he comes into my office and says, "Commander, what is the big deal?" So I beat my wife. Nobody's perfect. And I just wanted to throttle him. But I did not throttle him. I looked at him. He was my sailor of the quarter. Professionally, he was a good man. And he just didn't see this as a problem. So I said, "Well, did your daddy beat you?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am. He beat me every day." I said, "Did your grandfather beat your father?" He says, "He beat him so bad he couldn't stand." And then I just was quiet for a minute. And he said, "Doesn't everybody get beaten when they grow up?" And I said, "No, it's called assault. And if somebody did what you're doing to your wife, a stranger in the street, you would call the police and have them arrested. And what you're doing to your wife is assault. And I can't make you change. You have to decide for the next 1,000 years, your family is going to be beating each other up generation after generation after generation until someone says, no, we're going to stop it. It stops with me." And
Uh,
I think that's a critical element in soul evolution.
well,
People get beaten and beaten, and it's all they know. They think that that is the norm. And so I said, "Do you want your little girl to be beaten? Do you want her to marry a man who beats her? Because you're setting her up for that." And he said, all of these people he's talked to, no one ever explained it so bluntly, I guess. And I stopped being angry at him, and I saw him as a victim. But then I saw him as a person who has an opportunity to change. I don't think he was more than like 27. He was a young man, really strong man. And I said, I'm challenging you. Change the future for your lineage forever. You have that power. You are a powerful man. You're not anybody's victim anymore. And then he got transferred. So I would love to tell you it had a happy ending, but I don't know. I have to trust that that conversation had an impact. The degree, I don't know.
it's strange you should say that because my father was pretty much abusive, and with my mom too. And I was 15. I would looked up, and we were about the same size, and we would get into fights because me getting him off of her. And he didn't live with us, but he would visit. And my mom wanted to keep that open,
Mhm.
and we would get into pretty bad fights, I and him. And it stopped at one point, and somebody said that your parents are one of two things, either role models or warnings. I
That's a good point.
My kids, I couldn't spank. I didn't spank anybody. I couldn't spank anybody. Just go in the corner, turn around. I couldn't spank anybody. And it was just like, it was a laugh. One time I think I got so mad at I got so mad at my daughter. I said, if you don't do that, I'll spank you. And she even laughed. I said, she knows I don't even have it. But it was appalling. And to me, and the other way, I couldn't do that. And, I'd been in fights growing up. We're in the projects, but, hitting women was a no. And children, I didn't even spank them. So it's just something in me and stuff. Take away toys, this, punishment, this. And, and I got spanked, stitching cord, and just, to me, it was just an appalling thing. So I went the opposite way. And it's just, talk to you or find other ways to punish you or something like that. So they were not afraid of me at all. I remember time making my daughter go in the corner. You stand in the corner there and stuff like that. I'll tell you when they come out. Face the corner. So I went in there to make lunch and stuff. I heard her on the phone and stuff. It was the house phones and stuff. I say, who is? She said, it's for you. And she was crying and stuff. She said, Grandma wants to talk to you. I said, you called my mother on me? So, I was like, funny. I said, you called my mother on me? Yes. I told her what you did. She said, oh, let her out the corner. I said, worse happened to us. Well, I said, you called my mother on me. So, but yeah, I could see that. And it took me a long time to forgive my father because when he was buried, they were telling me things like, and I asked my mom, I'm longer than anybody. Why was he not happy? And she said, things didn't go out in life the way he wanted. He wanted to do this, didn't happen, this. And I say, he was angry because of that and stuff. And I was able to forgive him because of that, because, life didn't, at any turn, just didn't go the way he wanted. So I was able to forgive him.
Well, you had to get to that place, though.
Mm-hmm.
You had to get to that place where you had developed enough internal wisdom to be able to do that, to be able to choose to forgive because the forgiveness lived within you. And I think you can't order somebody. And I hear, sometimes it's religious leaders and sometimes it's just, friends or family saying, you should just forgive them and get on with it. And if you have learned the lesson of the experience and you can say, okay, this person did these things to me and I learned this, and this. And now I'm valuing the experience. Then, all right, now I understand. I have some understanding. Doesn't mean you have 100%. Now I can forgive this person. And it doesn't mean that you said what they did was okay. All it means is that you are detaching from a great deal of the emotion. That person's going to be who they are, no matter what you think or do or have an emotion about. When you can detach from that, and then you go to that place of, I'm forgiving them. And I'm setting, in a sense, you set yourself free and you set that person free. And it brings you a much increased level of peace. And it can be very, 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 very dynamic and meaningful. I think that people come into lives. I have a friend who has endless problems with feet and legs, endless problems. And in previous lives, this person had huge problems with legs. In this life, the problems and the issues, because legs and feet represent your foundation in life. And that makes a huge difference in how you move forward. Problems with feet or problems with foundation. And if your foundation is really damaged and you do the emotional, spiritual work to come to terms with what happened to you, sometimes you can stop the problems with your feet. Not all the time, but sometimes. And it's an interesting thing. It's just an interesting thing.
Here is a thing I think I brought over from another life. Um, Years ago, before I gave a lot of it up, as um, I gave up beef and pork out of nowhere. And a guy that worked with me said, cheeseburgers used to be your go-to lunch. Cheeseburgers and pork. I love pork rinds and everything and stuff. And I gave it up. I gave those meats up. And I think it's going on 16 years now that I don't say vegan because I wear leather shoes and stuff. I just went kind of plant based and stuff. It made sense to me and stuff. And they asked me about it. I don't hate those foods. I miss spam. I miss spam. One of the worst meat cracklings and I hamburgers and stuff. I ate Impossible burgers, cheeseburgers. But I don't know why. And people ask me, I say it came to me, and somehow I did. I don't know. I just brought it from a past life or something like that. And I just gave it up. And I don't really know why I gave it up.
They're very interesting. Yeah, I gave up pork. Pork is, I mean, the frequency of pork is pretty low. So it's for me on a spiritual path. That was something that I did give up. The beef, not so much. Really do enjoy that. So not a vegan, but
And I don't hate them. And it's like I'm
right.
not vegan. People, you shouldn't eat animals and stuff. I can't say that. I said I still got the taste of cheeseburgers in my mouth, but I won't eat them. And I said I don't know why, but I just made that decision and didn't do it anymore. Something is like nah. And I've heard things that pork is supposed to be unclean. And it said maybe I was a different religion or something in a past life.
Maybe you were Hindu in another life and you didn't eat beef.
maybe as Muslim or Jewish, I don't know. But I was like, I know, and I loved cracklings and stuff, and the pork, and grew up eating that stuff. Grew up eating chitlins, so I was like, but just didn't touch it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I grew up in the South. I grew up in North Carolina, and I yeah, we had those things too. And of course, when I grew up, it feels like life was really different. I was talking to my sister about this. When I grew up, when I was born, Civil War widows were still receiving pensions.
Wow.
And the last beneficiary from the Union Army died he was really, really young. I think he died in the early 60s. And you think, how could anybody have lived that long? But this guy lived a really, really long time. And, speaking of past lives, there was a very interesting man who always had me remote view his homes or his office. He had one ghost problem after the other. So I'm always cleaning these up. And I could see what was happening in this life, and then I could see what was happening in another life. And he had been a surgeon in a Civil War hospital. And before that, he had been a doctor in the South treating slaves. And he was an extremely compassionate man, and he was beloved by people who weren't given the time of day. I mean, that's an understatement. And so, long after he died, and he was having me remote view. I keep seeing these people who said, he was so good to me in that life, and I miss him, and he was so kind. And then my sister did a little research, and she went back and looked. They had photographs of the doctors who, for the Union Army, who practiced medicine in the Civil War. And there he was. You could see his name, you could see his face, the eyes were
Wow.
the same, the body was the same. We got chills. And this life, he was a chiropractor, energy worker, because he couldn't handle surgery or blood or any of the things that he would have seen, the horrors that took place in the Civil War. And of course, he lived in Virginia, and 2,000 out of 4,000 battles of the Civil War took place there. And I think that when we're looking at past lives, it's like doctors have been doctors life after life after life, because by God, this life, they're just sure they're going to be able to save that person. And I think that that's not true for every profession, but for a lot of them, that is true. I think my husband's been has had, I don't know how many lives as a sailor. I mean, in this life, he spent 42 years at sea. That's a lot of time at sea. And so I think that we come back with a mission or a purpose. A purpose is just to get through something really hard, but a mission, and I really think you had or have a mission which really is service above and beyond. When you're doing social work, it is really, really hard work. I can't say that I have a deep understanding of all that you have been through, but I have a respect and an appreciation for how hard this must have been. And so, I mean, that's a major mission, helping. I don't even think you have any idea how many hundreds of people you helped and the future generations you may have saved. I mean, that's got to be a pretty dynamic thought, don't you think?
I gotta I had a feeling on the last day, the person I used to go out with on adult protective services, we used to go out as a team, this woman, and so safety reasons. So we had this one house, and she was like, "Okay," it was like, "This is your last day here, at Adult Protective Services." Said, "I'm going to take you to lunch, Ron." So, but I got one place I need you to go out with me. And she said, "I don't think she's home. I've been there 3 times already. Maybe she's in a nursing facility because they last like, and sometimes there will already be in nursing facilities."
Hmm.
So she got that case, so we went there and stuff, and and she's been out with me quite a while and stuff. And it was off the street. And I was like, she said, "Yeah." I said, "No, I don't think it's just like, let's just go to lunch now. Just go out with me as one more case." I said, "Okay." And we'll go to lunch afterwards. So I did. And we're around the little apartment she was in and stuff, and kind of move around. It was on the first floor. And she's knocking and stuff. I said, "Look like somebody tried to deliver medicine to her." And she's like, "Yeah, she might be in a nursing facility in the street." And I was like, "I'm gonna go around the other side here and see." And she's like, "Don't stop her. You're gonna find a dead person. Don't start." I was like, "Just give me a few minutes." So I went around the other side and stuff, uh, and I was yelling, and the traffic was going by. Because I heard a faint yell. Somebody said, "I'm here. Help me." And I said, "Somebody's in there, Kathy. Somebody's in there." She said, "Don't start. Don't start." I said, "Somebody's in there." And she's like, "Are you joking and stuff?" And I said, "I'm so sure we had to call the police." I said, "Somebody's in there." And she went around outside. I didn't hear anything. I said, "I'm sure somebody's in there." And so we did. And the police came out. And I said, around the other side by the window, he ran around. He said, "I heard it too." And so he was yelling, "Can we come in? Can we come in?" Yelling and stuff. And he heard and stuff. So they kicked in the door, went in there and stuff. She had fallen and there were roaches all over her and stuff. And it was hot in the summer, and it was really stifling hot in that house and stuff. And she defecated all over herself, and they called the EMTs to come get her and stuff, and they're getting her, and they were rolling her out in the gurney and stuff. And she was like, thank you, telling the police, thank you so much and stuff. She said, I thought I was going to die, and it was so hot. I'm so thirsty. And she was, crying and stuff. And she said, and I was talking, she said, wait a minute. She said, you were the one on the side. And I said, yeah. And she said, thank you. I thought I was going to die there. I told Kathy, I said, aha, this one's a lie. But that was the last.
You were basically her angel in that moment.
That's the last case I had there. So,
well, it was a really powerful one.
Yes. And it was like, and
well, you have the benefit of knowing you made a difference.
Yeah,
it's a really big deal. I mean, I think she's right. She would have died had you not used your instinct to go around and call out.
Yeah, I didn't think it was me. I think I felt something, and it was lucky for her. But I was just really. But this question: do you decide to come back with your mission to be the bad guy? And the reason I ask this question is because, and Jesus knew who was going to betray him. He knew literally he was going to betray him.
Yeah, he did.
Yes. And who he was and how it's going to be done. But it was a prophecy that had to be fulfilled. Did you make the agreement to come down? Judas said, like, we need somebody to betray him so the prophecy can be fulfilled. And he could be raised from the dead, but somebody has to betray him. And it's a hard thing. He said, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. But forever, your name is going to be, when people talk about turning on them, they're going to use your name forever. You're going to be the bad guy. But it has to be done. Do you agree to come back and be the bad guy? That's my question.
I
make an agreement.
I believe, I cannot say definitively because nobody died and put me in charge, but I agree with you that there are people who challenge you to decide who you are.
Yes.
And you can choose to be as bad as you are, or you can choose to behave in certain ways that forces the other person to make certain decisions. Now, some people are truly horrible because they don't reincarnate from the higher realms. They reincarnate from the lower astral, and they are truly evil. And we see this certainly with human trafficking. We see it with serial killers, psychopaths, paranoid schizophrenics, sociopaths. These people have bits and pieces of their souls shaved off till they have no conscience.
Oh my God. You're saying exactly what my grandmother used to say. She said it different ways. She'd be like, as a teenager and a young man, she's like, okay, bye. She said, be careful out there. She said, some people are born without a finger or a toe. Some people are born without souls. That's what she was saying.
And she was correct. Some people are born and there's a deadness to their eyes.
Yeah.
And they come in from the time they're 3 or 4 or 5 years old. Their parents are terrified of them. Absolutely terrified of these children. And I've studied case after case after case of this. And I can do a dissertation on it, and we're at an hour. So, but when you look at what happens, that soul has to be crossed over when they died. And I wrote this book, the Crossing Over Prayer Book. And it's 88 prayers that help the living and the dead. And in that book, there are prayers to cross over murderers. And people will say to me, why would you help a murderer? Why would God welcome a murderer? It's like, when you cross them over, We know in the 23rd Psalm it says, He restoreth my soul. Well, if bits and pieces of the true nature of your soul are all gone, how does it get restored if you don't cross them over? If you don't allow the light of God to embrace that person, it doesn't erase the karma they created. That karma still has to be burned off. But once they are crossed over, maybe the next life they won't come back as a serial killer. Maybe the next life they will do something different. They will choose more wisely. And that's my purpose, because they haunt the living. They absolutely keep their victims prisoners. So if I'm crossing over a murder victim and the murderer also died in that, maybe it's a shootout or something, by God, I cross all of them over. And in our Father's house are many mansions. Based on their frequency, they go to different places. The karma is different. So when you look at it from that mechanical concept, and I'm not judging the murderer. It's not, thank
But
it's not.
people say hell. They say hell, but is that a human concept? Hell with the lake of fire, and is that a human concept? Because
The lake of
I'm
fire,
thinking,
when hell is a construct that people use. However, there is something called the lower astral, and there's an enormous amount of darkness. When people do tarot cards, they do violent video games, they're doing seances, they're doing these horrible rituals, satanic rituals. They open a doorway to what's called the lower astral, and there are very dark beings there. And it goes way back to the Lucifer rebellion, which we're not going to go into today. When you begin to put these pieces together, what you realize is that when you're crossing these beings over without judgment, without prejudice in any way, some of the most horrible people you're going to cross over, then you are truly cleaning an area, and it begins to shift the energy for yourself and for your family for maybe hundreds of years to come, because people know they're murderers. I did a regression with a woman, and her husband killed her life after life, and she's married to him to this day. And this time she did different things, and he has begun to change, and she's still with him, and his personality began to change. They did a lot of work. She stood up to him. She gained his respect. He did not kill her this life.
mm-hmm.
I do not anticipate that happening. They will both die from whatever the health causes are that causes a person's eventual death, but it's not going to be because of murder. And their whole family has benefited because they truly embraced a spiritual path. And it doesn't matter what your religion is. Your faith isn't inside a building of wood and stone. It's inside of you in your personal private connection to God and to
Mm-hmm.
Christ. I mean, if Buddha works for you, great. But you're basically connecting to God in some way, lifts your frequency, and helps not just you personally, but everyone, everything around you benefits. And that's, you're lifting up your whole geographic area because of the goodness of your faith. That's my theory. So,
I've heard that before. It's like when I said Howard Storm's book, his descent into hell, and he encountered Jesus, who he did not believe in, Yeshua. He did not believe in when he died, and he said one of the questions he asked him, which religion should I choose? And he said, whichever one brings you closer to God. So it wasn't an issue. It was like, not Christianity. He said, whichever one brings you closer to God. So I thought that was an interesting answer.
well, the Dalai Lama was asked that question. Should everybody become Buddhist? And his answer was, you're born into a faith, or a faith is, you resonate with it. To be the best of your faith. If you're Jewish, be the best Jew you can be, or you're Christian, or you're Hindu, or whatever you are. Represent the highest ideals of your faith, the goodness.
Mhm.
And if you don't have a faith that a label, just love those who are around you. And that's really all you need to do. And it can be breathtakingly simple. And the private prayers you say are just as powerful, whether they're in your bedroom or a forest, as they are in a building of wood and stone. That's kind of my philosophy. So, well, Ron, I want to thank you for spending time with me today. And I
Oh,
had such a good time. We had to do this again.
yes. Thank you for having me.
Thank you
Yeah.
for coming on. Are there any parting words that you would like to share with people?
um, just essentially, something is a quote that stays in my mind and stuff. A society is judged on, and I'm paraphrasing it. A society is judged on how it treats its oldest and its youngest, you
Yeah.
know, and I do believe that. So,
I think that's a really great way to say it. And I would like to thank you for your service to humanity as a social worker, because you're truly in the trenches, and you have my utmost admiration. This is really hard work. So
it helped me. Maybe I don't have to come back. Maybe I'll have to come back next time.
well, maybe that's a topic for another time.
I
Coming
could
back.
go home. Yes, I could go home for good.
That will be, I'm sure when you do get there, it's going to be glorious. Absolutely glorious. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on Ghost Helpers. You can reach us at contact@ghosthelpers.com. We're on YouTube, and look up the website. And if you want to contact me, again, contact at Ghost Helpers. And thank you so much for joining us. Bye bye.